This is Michael Silber with Red Blizzard. Welcome to the Working with Timeline Editor video tutorial. As mentioned in the previous tutorial, animating X and Y translation, we can jump to different points within the animation by dragging the playhead with the mouse or by using the time frame control located right on top of the timeline itself. By using the time frame control, you'll have more precision, enabling you to advance one frame at a time and position the playhead exactly where you need it to be. We can also zoom in by using the zoom control located in the timeline. This will give us more resolution in terms of the frames that we can see within the timeline. You can zoom out or zoom in. Now let's focus on adjusting the timing of a given keyframe. We can do this in several ways. We can select the keyframe with the mouse and simply drag it left or right, or we can use the left or right arrow keys to move it in either direction. The arrow keys advance or reverse by one keyframe each time they're pressed, giving you more precision and control as opposed to using the mouse. We can also adjust the time position of that keyframe by utilizing the keyframe pane located here on the right. Now notice that every time we click on a keyframe, the corresponding values of that keyframe are loaded in the keyframe panel. Let's look at this a bit closer. In the keyframe panel, we see the keyframe that we selected, the next keyframe, and the type of transition between the two keyframes. We can adjust all the values for that given keyframe within the keyframe panel as well. We can also displace an entire segment consisting of an initial keyframe and a final keyframe by clicking on it and then simply moving it left or right. Once we have that selection, we can also use the arrow keys to navigate left or right, like so. If we want to add a new keyframe to the timeline, we need to first position the playhead where we want our new keyframe to be. Then, click on this icon to add a new keyframe to the timeline. The default or customized value for that keyframe will be calculated based on the next and previous keyframes. Another way to add keyframes is by using the Effects menu. First, make sure the playhead is at the correct frame. The Effects menu is accessible by clicking on the FX icon, which will open a menu with all available transforms and effects. Let's add a new keyframe for Translate Y. Once I click, the new keyframe is added to the object at the playhead's frame. If you need to delete a keyframe, simply click on it and then either click on the delete button or use the delete key. Throughout your project's development, you'll probably need to insert or remove frames in the middle of the timeline to adjust the timing of your animation. To do this, first position the playhead where you need to insert frames and simply click on the Insert Frames button. Each time you click, a new frame is added to the timeline, and all subsequent keyframes are pushed by one frame. To remove frames, position the playhead and then click on the Remove Frames button. The timeline also provides the ability to copy objects. Select the object first and then click on the Copy button. This will copy everything for that object, including formats and keyframes. To delete an object, simply click it to select it, then either click on the Delete button located right here or press the Delete or Backspace key on your keyboard. Another operation you can perform from the timeline is changing an object's z-index. The z-index enables you to specify which objects will appear on top of other objects. Let's try this now by adding several new objects. We'll add a text box like so, and then just add an ellipse. Next, let's change the color of the ellipse to yellow with no border. And now we have the three objects. The text object has a higher z-index than the rectangle, and the yellow ellipse has a higher z-index than both the text and the rectangle. If you want to change that, you can use the timeline. Just click on this icon and drag it up or down. Dragging it like this will give the text a higher z-index than the ellipse. If you want the rectangle to be on top of everything, simply click, then drag it and drop it on top of our other objects. Now it's time to add opacity. By opening the Effects menu, we can add an opacity keyframe. The default value of our new opacity keyframe will be 1, making it fully visible. Let's adjust the opacity level from the keyframe panel. If we set it to 0, the object becomes fully transparent. Let's make the object fade in over 1 second, which at 24 frames per second will be 24 frames. We leave this keyframe at 0 opacity, and we add a new opacity keyframe 24 frames later. Now let's take a look at the keyframe panel. We have the first opacity keyframes set at 0 opacity, and then we have the next keyframe at an opacity of 1. By default, a linear transition between the two keyframes takes place. This means that the opacity is adjusted gradually from 0 to 1 during those 24 frames. Let's play it. If we don't want a smooth transition between the opacity values, we set the transition to none, which will cause the opacity to jump from 0 to 1 at the second keyframe. Let's play that now. There are other transitions, such as easing, that are available, but we'll cover those in another tutorial. Sometimes it's useful to hide an object because we want to work on another object directly beneath it, or we may just want to see our composition without that object. To do this, go to the left part of the timeline and click on the eye-shaped icon for the object you want to hide. Clicking the eye will toggle that object's visibility. Keep in mind that hiding an object is not the same as making it transparent by setting its opacity to 0. When we hide an object, it gets removed from the canvas, but when setting its opacity to 0, the object remains on the canvas and still responds to mouse events. Likewise, if you want to exclude a given effect or transform from rendering, click on the eye icon corresponding to that effect. For example, let's exclude the opacity effect from the playrun. Notice that at this point in the timeline, the opacity is set to a value between 0 and 1, and the object is semi-transparent. When we click the eye icon, notice the object becomes fully opaque because the opacity effect is hidden, and the object takes the default opacity value of 1, or fully opaque. Click the icon again to toggle, and the effect is rendered and the object takes the opacity value corresponding to that point in the timeline. This is Michael Silber with Red Blizzard. Thank you for watching Working with the Timeline Editor. To learn more about FX Studio, visit www.redblizzard.com.